Welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of a place to hang your cape. And this week, Black Lives Still Matter. Cue the music. Hello there, capers, and as I said, welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of a place to hang your cape. My name's Scott James Merridew, and this is the show where we talk about various geek and nerd-related topics. I'm joined each week by a very special different guest. And once again, we're talking about a very serious topic. You may recall our episode a few weeks ago on the subject of Black superheroes and Black Lives Matter movement, and we're continuing that topic of conversation because, frankly, this movement is ongoing and it's still worth talking about. It's not just a one-off. And I am joined once again by my good friend who was on the last episode, Archit Tripathi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me back.
Not a problem. And we're also joined by a friend of Archit's. Give it up, capers, for Ngwevela.
Hi, y'all. Thank you for inviting me.
Not at all. It's our pleasure to have you. So, Lindy, where are you calling from right now?
Well, at the moment, I am stranded in the Caribbean because my home country has closed all of the borders. I'm from South Africa.
I see. Okay. I mean, I wouldn't say there's worse places to be stranded than the Caribbean, but I imagine it's still not fun.
Yeah, it's not fun when you're like on an island and you still can't go to the beach.
Oh no, that's the worst.
Yeah.
It's like it's out there just taunting you.
Exactly. Pretty much.
I'm very glad to have you with us here today. And so what we're going to do, capers, is we talked about black superheroes and black comic book characters. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a wider discussion of the way black people, and indeed people of color in general, are presented in the media, particularly in the realms of fiction, particularly in the realms of film, and also just to get a bit of an analysis, as much as, you know, me being a 28-year-old white man can give analysis on the Black Lives Matter movement as it stands right now. Because here's the thing, guys. I haven't heard a lot of stuff about Black Lives Matter in the news recently, and I wonder if that's deliberate.
I wonder.
Because, I mean, here's the thing with the way the world works now is we now have the 24-hour news cycle, which means they're constantly sniffing out the big, new, exciting thing, and once they've done that for a couple of weeks, then they move on, regardless if the thing that they previously covered is still ongoing. And so I've been forced to sort of get all of my news regarding the Black Lives Matter movement just from the internet.
Well, actually, something that I find interesting about the internet, and I'm so glad that we live in this digital age, is that there's less reliance, I think, on the mainstream narratives that are provided by the news, because now you're getting journalism sort of from what you call citizen journalism, where people are posting their on ground experiences, and we're not getting a filter through more mainstream corporate journalism. So, quite frankly, I'm not that saddened by the lack of coverage in mainstream news. What I'm saddened by is a lot of older generations' reliance still on mainstream news, when we know that it's actually quite biased, and it also tends to be quite selective about what they think is important and what isn't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad still reads newspapers, something that I have never done.
They still print those?
They do in this country. Because, I mean, if the Daily Mail went out of business, people would shoot themselves in the street. Frankly, I wouldn't mourn those people's losses, considering the state of the Daily Mail, but, you know. And it is weird. And what we're seeing now, what I'm seeing now at least, this is just what I'm getting filtered through to me, is a lot, as you say, citizen journalism, which seems to be primarily taking the form of people recording a lot of white people being overtly and publicly and disgustingly racist.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because when I was a kid, I mean, I mean, I would say that Archit and you and I are what we would call like the very young digital immigrants, meaning we weren't born into the world of everybody just having smartphones and everybody having access to social media, but we
I
came
remember
into it.
dial-up.
Oh, right? Screech,
Mom, put
screech.
down the phone. I'm online.
Oh my God, those days. Oh, kids these days will never know how rough it was. Um, but we were still relatively young when we came into this digital age. Um,
Mhm.
and oh my gosh, I was almost losing my track of thought. Where did I start with this?
Digital age, people being racist online, and
Oh, yes, yes. So, back in the days when we were younger and we would try to convey our experiences to people, they would always say, "Oh, it was easy for them to sweep it under the rug or to brush it off and say you're exaggerating, or I bet
Mhm.
it doesn't even happen that often, or I bet it wasn't even that bad. Okay, maybe you might have had that interaction with that lady, but I'm sure it wasn't as bad as you're describing it." Now we are seeing how frequent it is, and we are seeing how bad it actually is.
Yeah.
And so there's no way really that any sensible person can deny that police brutality is happening as frequently as we say it is. And therefore, we are valid in our feelings of distrusting police, that microaggressions and also open hostility happen in public all the time. And we're not exaggerating the frequency and also the severity. Now you can't really deny it if you have access to the internet.
because
Yeah. It's
everyone's got a smartphone and everyone's got a video recorder on their smartphone, and so, I mean, a lot of the things I've seen have been quite distressing to watch. But the thing I have to keep in mind is it's happening all the time. And at first, I thought, because this has been going on since before Black Lives Matter really started getting some headway. A lot of people recording people yelling at black families to leave when they're barbecuing in a public place,
Mm,
or denying people services in the shop, or accusing them of things they didn't do.
right.
yeah.
Racial
Uh,
profiling in
Yeah.
shops.
and I
It's funny
realized
because
that. Oh, sorry, go
there's
on.
this, there's this whole thing. I think some of the people who are criticizing these acts of citizen journalism are saying, "Oh, it's crazy. We live in such a divided society. Racism is on the rise." No, it's not on the
No,
it's not on the rise. It's been at the top
No,
forever. It's just that
people
it's finally everyone has a camera in their hands. Cameras are finally cheap and accessible enough that everyone has one and can finally actually document this.
exactly. When people are saying we've never been more divided now than before, and I'm like, there was a time when my mother couldn't drink at the same drinking fountain as anybody else. I mean, we've been divided. It's just that these stories we've had to keep quiet. When we complained, then we couldn't get jobs, or we wouldn't be believed, or, we would get shut down very easily because there was no way to prove that these things were happening at the same frequency.
yeah, it's not happening more; it's getting recorded more, and
Exactly.
that's what the realization I came to. And because again, this is the question of white privilege, because those interactions, I have never had that happen to me, and I've never been witness to that. And so it's something of an awakening for me, which is stupid because I shouldn't have to be awoken to this. But there it is. And it's amazing because you can't get away with it. And people know that you can't get away with people. Racist people, here's the thing about racist people: they know that racism is bad. Some people try to justify it in the moment, but the justification is always, "Oh, no, 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 I'm not racist. What I was just angry, or I was drunk, or I'd taken too many pills, or I thought she was right, Roseanne."
Oh yeah. I mean, this whole matter of privilege also speaks to who gets to define what racism is, and
Hmm.
who gets to
Yes.
define what constitutes. Because there are a lot of white people who will say, I've seen real racism. That instance that you're talking about, that's not real racism because nobody called you a nigger straight to your face, right? So therefore, it's not real racism. Nobody told you to get out because you are black. They think that they can define racism according to their own, which is the privilege of being part of a dominant class, right? You get to write the narrative of what is real and what is not. and you don't even know that you're dominating a conversation that doesn't even really affect you. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely,
Yes.
because I've never experienced racism, so how could I
Mm.
possibly say with any degree of certainty what it is? I like to think I could identify it when it's happening to other people, but I don't know. I don't know.
There was this one quote that I read that said, privilege is thinking that something is not a problem because it's not a problem to you personally. And I was thinking about police brutality, where a lot of people will say, well, the reason why all of this police brutality happens is because people need to comply and people need to be respectful. I've had lots of interactions with cops, and when I get pulled over, I say, like, good morning, officer, and I comply. Therefore, I don't see why this police brutality thing is a problem. And it's like, well, I mean, just because it's not been problematic to you personally, right? Just because you have had positive experiences with a cop doesn't mean the majority of people who don't look like you have had the same experience.
Seriously,
Like,
it's so funny too how much that what you just spoke about mirrors, like the experience of racism mirrors what we're experiencing with people having these very negative reactions to the pandemic that's going on right now and just
Oh,
refusing to
yes.
acknowledge that it affects anyone. And oh, it's not that bad. It's just the flu. Oh, maybe like 2% of people die. That's nothing. Yeah, nobody in your family has died yet. Do you want to say that to the face of somebody who had to bury their grandmother? Would you like to tell them that to their face? Because I guarantee all your courage is going to disappear in that moment.
And also, it's a show of lack of empathy, right? When you're saying
Yeah.
that the only people who will really get affected are the elderly and the infirm, you're basically saying, okay, so who cares if they die? I'm healthy and I'm young, so therefore I can be protected. I mean, it also ignores the fact that we're also seeing a rise in otherwise healthy young people
Mm-hmm.
being negatively affected. So this is just completely tone deaf on so many levels. But this whole idea of like we should sacrifice our sick neighbors and our elderly parents, because to hell with them anyways, right? It's so unempathetic.
I mean, I'm technically an essential worker right now. I work in basically a big hardware store chain at the moment where I'm staying, and every single person who's come right up to me, ignoring the social distancing rules, which we tell them, we verbally tell them to do so. Every single person who's done that has been either quite young or anywhere up to middle age, so not elderly, and
Mm.
has not had children with them. All of the elderly and all of the people with young children have always made sure to stay far away from me. And it really says something about just, it's not, we're taught as children to put ourselves in other people's shoes.
Mm,
It's not difficult. It's insane, and I think it's the thing. So yeah, that's that side of it. That sort of reaction to, oh, just because it doesn't happen to me doesn't mean it's going to happen to you. But there's also this other side of it. This sort of there's a lot of people claiming to stand with Black Lives Matter and claiming to be allies, but a lot of that being an ally is quite performative.
Mm.
mm.
Yeah.
Oh my
Oh my God.
gosh.
Yeah.
Where
Oh
to
no, have I
begin?
opened
Yeah,
a can of
we've
worms?
had our own conversations about the whole issue of performative allyship and just how irritating it is. I mean, it's nice. You mean well, and that's great. Oh, but cool. You painted Black Lives Matter outside of Trump Tower. That's great. Now, are you going to end qualified immunity? Are
Hmm.
you going to stop redlining practices that have led to black families having a tenth of the wealth built up that white families have on average? Are you going to do anything about those kinds of issues? Because if you're not, then what was the point of all this? You know
Slogans
what I
and
mean?
hashtags don't fix
They don't
problems.
fix problems.
No,
Policy
no.
fixes problems.
Yeah, so let's talk about qualified immunity for a second, because bear in mind, I am an ignorant Englishman, and qualified immunity, I'm not sure is a thing in this country. I don't know for certain. So, what exactly is qualified immunity?
It is, you know what? I'm gonna actually just Google this really quick to get a better description of it. So
Um,
All right.
it's yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I just wanted to say, I mean, when you strip it down to bare bones, it's the idea that police officers are exempt from punishment when they do certain things that would otherwise would carry disciplinary action or punishment for a civilian, right? So, for example, if if a police officer wrestles me to the ground and shoves my face in the pavement, even though I have committed no crime and I have served and I have not been any danger to that police officer, right? They are immune from prosecution for assault. But if I so much as like shove a police officer, just shove him, not hurt him, shove him, I can be arrested for assaulting a police officer.
They
So
are
it's assault when,
civilians.
yeah, it's assault when I do it, but when a cop does it, but also, I mean, if they kill the wrong person in the process of, like, say, like in the process of carrying out a drug bust or something like that, right? And they kill innocent children. When they go into a house where there's a noise disturbance and they end up shooting somebody's dog because that dog was barking, anybody else would be held accountable for that, but a police officer has immunity. So they can literally show up in your yard and shoot your dog because it's barking and not be charged with anything.
And nowhere is there more an egregious example of that as with the case of Breonna Taylor.
Absolutely.
Oh my God.
I mean,
Seriously. And
and to
yeah.
the extent that Breonna Taylor's partner was charged for for shooting a police officer when he didn't even know that his house was being ransacked and broken into by police officers.
Because they
So he
didn't announce themselves.
Exactly. So for all he knew, he was practicing his right to stand his ground because he did not know that there were cops in there. But the cops who killed his partner are walking free, and they had the audacity to try to charge him for shooting another cop in the leg.
Yeah. Meanwhile, an EMT, someone who saved lives for her job, was shot multiple times in her own bed while she was asleep. It's
Yeah.
and her murderers, because that's what they are,
Mm-hmm.
murderers,
Hmm.
have still not been brought to justice. No charge has been filed, as far as I'm aware. Meanwhile, police officers who speak out against the discriminatory policies of their departments or the inherent flaws in the wider system are fired immediately.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Yeah,
it's
they're ostracized. They are put up for disciplinary actions. Basically, their life is made hell until they are either actually fired or just quit on their own accord. And so whenever people talk about, oh, not all cops, not all cops, a few bad apples. Here's the thing, like the whole "a few bad apples" analogy. There's a continuation to that sentence. A few bad apples spoils the bunch. If
Exactly.
you don't do anything about those bad apples, eventually the entire barrel of apples becomes rotten. And we in the United States, at least, have reached a point where the barrel of apples is not just rotten, the whole fucking barrel is green with mold all over the fucking place.
The whole
And it's because
orchard
there is
is fucked.
no incentive for cops to actually be good. There is no incentive to do the right thing. There are so many incentives to be protected and to know that, oh, I could fuck around and do something really stupid and blatantly terrible and evil, and I will be protected for it. But for the good cops who want to report that, they have no immunity. They get immediately pushed out and ostracized within their own community. And so what incentive is there to actually stand up and be a good cop
And
besides your own
also,
morality?
not only is there no accountability, there is incentive in many cases for cops to go out and commit
Mm-hmm.
acts that are that are just on the face of them disgusting and unjust. I mean, when you look at things like asset forfeiture, where
Oh, yes.
cops
I've
can
I've heard of that.
like a cop can stop somebody and search their car, and if they see that that person is holding expensive items or a certain amount of cash without warrantry and without evidence, they can seize all of the assets of that person on so not just the expensive items that are in the car, not just the money that is in the car, but the car itself, and basically hold their stuff hostage and when the person cannot pay the money back to retrieve their things, they sell those things off at auction. So when you see those police auctions, they'll tell you, oh, we seized all this from drug dealers, we seized all this from traffickers, we seized the stuff at the border from people who are trafficking drugs or children. They'll tell you all sorts of stories about where they got that stuff, when in reality they just stopped a couple that was crossing over the border from their spring break or something and had some cash on them, and that's who they got that car from, and they're selling it to you now.
Yeah. Another another
This is
example
how.
too.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, there's another great example is I actually saw a Twitter thread by an attorney who mentioned that, when she was looking at arrest reports for some of her clients, one of the first things that she would look at is the date and time that that report was filed.
Oh yeah.
Because more often than not, it's filed at the end of the day so that they can get immunity, so that they can get overtime pay to be able to do it. They'll make petty bullshit arrests just so that they can have some paperwork to fill out that they start at 4:59 p.m. so that they can now get some overtime pay out of it, which is of course, paid out by our own taxes. And also towards the end of the month where they have, we know this in the United States is a well-known fact that towards the end of the month you should be really careful when you're driving. You should stay under the speed limit, don't do anything too reckless, because towards the end of the month, between the 25th and the 30th, cops are going to be looking out for any little infraction they can write you a ticket for.
We have a similar problem here in the UK. It's this whole idea of the police have targets to hit.
Exactly, quotas.
Oh
salesmen or
yes,
something.
quotas.
Quotas, a certain amount of this crime, a certain amount of those crimes. The exact same problem here in the UK. And if you don't hit those targets, your department, your precinct, or whatever gets defunded somewhat. Or, well, not defunded. You don't get as big a budget next year or some other bullshit. So they have incentive to arrest people, which is insane.
And this is why they also are guilty of doing things like planting evidence, because or basically just trying to find people for dumb stuff like loitering. What is loitering really? What is, like, how do you arrest a homeless person for vagrancy? They don't have anywhere else to go. And so one of
Jaywalking.
jaywalking is another thing, right?
The
And
history of jaywalking is spectacular. Do you know about the history of jaywalking?
I
do
think I
not.
read I read something about why they called it that, but I don't
I
remember.
I learned about it on this television show called Adam Ruins Everything, which is
Love it.
hilarious and
Oh,
very
it's
funny.
amazing. Yes.
But it's basically this was back when American cities started getting a lot of cars in, because before then a lot of people were just walking around both on the sidewalk, as you call it, but also the main road, because the most dangerous thing on the main roads were just horse and carts. So like you can get away with those fairly pretty easy. But when cars started coming around, people were getting hit by cars. And rather than blaming the dangerous car drivers or just setting up some common sense laws like as for car operators, they said, okay, you can't go into the street anymore. And if you do, you'll be written up. Oh, what are we going to call this law? Let's call it jaywalking, because jay was a slur. And so if you walked in the middle of the street, you were a jay.
Jay.
What, out of curiosity, what was Jay a slur for?
I've no fucking clue, but it wasn't nice. It was
Right.
probably ethnic.
Yeah, I remember that part, and I don't remember what the slur was either. Oh man, I'm gonna have to Google it again.
Yeah, I mean, it's American history, so it's probably racist. Let's be honest.
It's always either going to be something like anti-Irish or anti-Semitic or
I think it was anti-Irish, yeah. And this interesting with that, because here's the thing: a lot of people, when defending racism or saying, "Oh no, I can't possibly be racist," they always bring up this. Well, particularly Americans, they always bring up this thing of, "Oh well, Irish people were persecuted, Irish people were treated as slaves," and it's like, okay, yes, at some points during American history, there were like restaurants that said, "We don't serve Irish here." Weren't any in the fucking 1960s, as far as I recall. Guess what there were, though? There were signs saying, "We don't serve colored people here." So,
Mm.
it's not really the same now, is it?
And also, I don't think there's like any Irish person today who is getting their loan application
Right.
or their housing application denied because their name is, you know, McDonald. Um, but if I'm trying to get a job or get a loan or get an apartment, I'm far more likely to be turned down or to get a letter or a phone call saying, "Oh, sorry, the position has been filled" or whatever because of a name like Lindiwe Ngwevela.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, I mean, and that's something that I think is a thing that maybe a lot of white listeners may not know about. But for people of color and people with ethnic names such as myself and Lindy, we, like for me, when I was last on a job hunt, I made sure that my resume included the anglicized version of my name so that any recruiter looking at it would be able to be like, oh, okay, I know how to say this person's name now, so I don't have to throw their thing out just because it might be awkward to speak to them,
It's
and
insane.
people of color have had to do that forever and still have to do that, put in, either anglicize their name themselves or at least put that in parentheses somewhere as a hope that your ethnic sounding name won't just get your resume thrown out.
There are
But
even
white people
parents.
with oh, sorry,
Oh,
go on.
sorry. No, I was just gonna say there are even parents who take great pains to make sure that they don't give their children names that sound quote unquote ethnic, which is a word I'm already comfortable with, but who don't want so-called ethnic names for their children because they don't want to sabotage their children's futures.
I mean, it goes all the way back to Ellis Island. Immigrants would come in and they would be given new names to make them sound more quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
American.
Mm.
And I mean, and yet, if you were white, however, oh, what's your name? Tchaikovsky? Yeah, sure, that's fine. Keep that.
Yeah, as I was saying to you earlier, Scott, if the Benedict Cumberbatches and the Engelbert Humperdinks of the world can get their due, then I think the Archit Tripathis and the Lindiwe Ngwelas can also, you can learn how to pronounce that too.
Absolutely, yeah. It
Um,
just a bit of effort, guys. Come on. And
this
it all.
actress. Oh, sorry,
Sorry,
sorry. Go on.
no.
No, I was just gonna say this actress from
Orange is the New
um
Black.
Orange
Orange
is
is
the
the
New
New
Black?
Black.
Yeah.
Exactly. She was saying how her mother told her that if they can pronounce, you know, like Tchaikovsky and all these other names, they can pronounce Azuamaka.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it all goes back to this framework, both in the UK and the US, that is racist. And people have been saying like, "Oh, the system's broken," and other people have been saying, "No, the system works just great."
The system works exactly as it was designed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just that it's
just
not
great was probably
designed
the
to
wrong way
work
to
for
put that.
everyone. Right. It's not it wasn't designed to work for women, for queer people, for
Yeah.
people from India, people from China, like for black people, Native Americans, etc.
So I saw this tweet, including a picture of the signing of the American Declaration of Independence, and this
Oh,
guy
I know what you're. Yeah.
put red dots on all the men in this
Yeah.
painting who owned slaves.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
There's like 3 guys that don't have red dots.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah. And
Wow.
these are the guys who wrote "All Men Are Created Equal."
Well, that's because they didn't consider black people to fully be people. They put in clauses like the three-fifths clause to make sure that black people were not fully considered human. They were
Yeah.
technically
Actually, at
human,
the
but also
time,
subhuman at the same time.
Yeah, actually, at the time that it was signed, they didn't even consider poor white people to fully be people under that
Mm.
"all men are equal." It was all the
I'm going on a
laws
rant. I'm going on a rant. I'm going on a
regarding
rant. It
being
is
able
my
to vote.
right as an Englishman that you fought a war against to go on this rant. Ahem. Oh, you want your
So
own
they
country, do you?
even you had to be a wealthy white landowner in order to be able to vote at one point in this country. When the vote was founded, you had to have land. You had to be white and own land and be a man, of course.
Of
Yeah.
course, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yay! George Washington is fighting a war for us, so we're gonna be allowed to vote. What's that? I can't vote. Oh, but at least my taxes have gone down. Oh, they've gone up. Shit.
Right.
Yeah, that happened. That happened. And here's the thing. Those whole taxes on tea, those were actually tariffs. So the only people that are hurting from that were the rich guys. The whole American War of Independence, the American Revolution, was founded by guys who didn't want to lose money.
Pretty
It's
much. And also there was in Europe at the time, a lot of places were starting to abolish slavery across Europe,
Hmm.
and because Americans did not, the slave owning Americans did not want to be beholden to British decree, and they were afraid of, the idea that that the British were going to enforce this abolishment of this abolition of slavery on Americans. They also fought this war because they wanted to retain their right to own other people, right? They didn't want to fall into sort of like the jurisdiction of a European nation that was now abolishing slavery, because that means that they would also by extension have to abolish slavery. So they basically were fighting for their right to also own people, which is doesn't sound like liberty for all to me.
No, it really doesn't. It's insane. And don't get me wrong, Britain was awful at that time. It was an awful, awful, awful place for anyone to live because it was, tyranny, because only rich white landowners could vote. It was the exact same system
Hmm.
in the UK. Well, here's the thing. I think there's a lot of problems with British history because we were evil. I think evil's the right word. But
I
a lot of the time,
concur.
we don't really, as a country, we don't talk about it a lot, but we don't ignore it either. We don't, or rather, we do kind of ignore it, but we don't lie about it. We don't fabricate. We don't say, oh, no, 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 no. People in India, they loved us. They welcomed us in and it was all great and nothing bad happened ever. We don't do that. America romanticizes its own history on an
Yeah.
insane level to the point where its false history is taught in the classroom.
Yeah, George Washington's wooden teeth actually pulled
Oh
from
yeah.
slaves.
Oh my god.
Thomas Jefferson's, black lover and his many black descendants. No, black slave, which he owned as a 40-year-old man, raped this 14-year-old girl, had several children with her, who I guess the children, because they were partially his, he let them free, but she remained a slave her entire life.
And he promised her freedom, by the way. But after he died, those children had to fight for her to be freed. So, I mean, when they say, "Oh, but George Washington freed his slaves upon his death," that's not actually true.
No.
And then,
It,
of course, there's the first Thanksgiving, right? That whole beautiful
Mm.
oh,
narrative about the Native Americans teaching the settlers how to grow corn.
Oh my God. Yeah. Just the
yeah.
most romanticized thing ever. Just let's completely erase the fact that you raped and mutilated entire civilizations worth of people. People
And
who were not
Pocahontas had animal
savages, were
friends that she
not.
sang with.
Yeah, these were people who had sophisticated societies. They had cities, they had houses, they had planning, they had arts, they had culture, they had all of the things that we consider the hallmarks of a civilized society, just different from the European version. But the narrative that we received as school children was, oh, these were just savages living in the forests and, in isolated little bands here and there. And we taught them how to like do this and do that. And in exchange, they gave us fish and eels for Thanksgiving. No, no, you decimated entire populations.
And
A
the
lot
Trail
of
of
it
Tears was
deliberately and
just a
some of
big
it from
road full of
disease.
rom-coms.
Yeah.
And here's I only learned this week during the whole Trail of Tears thing, where Native Americans were being massacred and forced off the land en
Mm-hmm.
masse. There was a famine going on in Ireland, and several Native American Native American groups, sent money to Ireland as relief money due to the Irish famine. During one of the worst periods in their history ever, they still tried to help uh, Ireland. There's a monument in Ireland to
Yeah,
that.
I was just gonna say I've
Yeah.
heard about that. Isn't there a monument in Ireland?
I think it's in Cork County. I'm not quite sure, but it's. I mean, oh god, oh god, Britain is so evil. And because here's the thing, and this all of these problems that we talked about, these historical problems, they could have gone away. No, they're not gone away. They could have been taught. This whole romanticization could have gone away, and everything could be taught better. But the problem is, it's propagated. It's
Yeah.
exacerbated by pop culture. I'm sorry, I'm going to call out Hamilton.
Oh, please
I still
do.
haven't seen it. I know it's on Disney Plus now, but I still haven't gotten around to it.
I saw it, and I'll be honest, I liked it. Then I did a little bit of research, and now I no longer like it.
Mm.
Yeah, I heard that there was a lot of I I, I don't want to even use the word whitewashing because the whole point of why he cast a cast of color was that he was trying to sort of flip the narrative and flip the switch. But apparently there was a lot of telling the story of Alexander Hamilton in a way that didn't quite cover the real story of and also his cohorts.
Yeah, I mean, George Washington is portrayed as a dignified and noble person, owned slaves. Thomas Jefferson, oh, they called him out for owning slaves, didn't even scratch the surface.
Hmm.
And not to mention all the other people. I mean, they mentioned John Lawrence, who was a fierce abolitionist. As far as I'm aware, that was true. Cool. But the rest of them, like, no. And here's the thing. If you genuinely tried to tell the actual truth about these people, I think a lot of Americans just simply wouldn't believe you.
Yeah.
But you know something that I find kind of wacky, but at the same time I'm not even surprised is um growing up, I was an avid watcher of the History Channel, and I still kind of am. I mean, part of the reason why I stopped watching it was because it all became about ice truckers and fishermen and aliens. But but lately, I've been rewatching it because every now and again they'll actually do history. But now, why I'm so disenchanted with it is every single aspect of American history that they cover is exclusively devoted to somehow glorifying or making sympathetic all of these founding fathers or the people who were there for like the Oregon Trail or all of the people who are part of. There's a series that's called "The Foods That Made America" or something like that, where they talk about like Milton Hershey and all of these people who built food, who industrialized food in America. And all of these narratives are exclusively white men. I mean, they throw in the odd white woman, but these stories are the foods that made America, right? Another series called the men who built America. Another series that's called America's most important hours or something like that, that plays on Sundays now. Every single one of them tries to give a sympathetic backstory as to why somebody became as hardened as he was, or why somebody was so devoted to whatever cause of, colonial cause he was.
Hmm.
They don't talk about the failures. They don't talk about the really horrific military strategies that they employed in order to win battles that actually were so foolish and were so childish and stupid. They talk about these people like they were great military minds, even
Washington
when
was not a great military mind.
he was a huge failure. I mean, even his peers were saying that he is not qualified for his post. Who was it? James Madison, who said that Washington was either an apostate or an imposter. Uh,
Ooh.
Like even their own friends were like, "Bruh, I don't know. Like maybe your dad's money got you this job because you're not qualified." They were like the Donald Trumps of their time. They were not qualified, but they
Oh,
were rich.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You don't need to be qualified. You don't need to be intelligent. You just need to be rich and white and a man to succeed in America. And
You don't
this is
even have to go on.
it's just because here's the thing. Part of this is all going towards this American narrative, or what's also known as the American dream. If you come here and you work hard, you can succeed. That is bullshit. It's the greatest marketing scam in the history of the world because America, even today, compared by a lot of other first world nations, has very, very low social mobility.
Mm.
And which, of course, because of the systemic racism that's prevalent in that society, um, especially is targeted towards people of color and black people in particular, because it's very, very expensive to be poor in America.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh my
It's
God.
Oh,
Yeah.
people
the
do not
system.
know how expensive poverty is.
Because I've not had a lot of money as an adult in this country, but I've never experienced poverty. I mean, based on what I've heard, I don't know if I would survive in America because everything is prohibitively expensive and it's designed to keep people in poverty.
Hmm.
That's how it's supposed to work. And uh, it's a smarter man than me could go into the details of all that, but the bizarre thing I find is that the narrative of the American dream continues.
I was having this conversation with a friend of mine once, and she was saying how basically the system is made it's set up to be a poverty investment, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, if right now you don't make enough money to go see the dentist because you have a toothache and you might have a cavity and you don't want to go to the dentist because you have to pay rent, later on that cavity is going to end up with you having multiple cavities and having a bunch of your teeth removed, which is going to be more expensive than if you had just gone to the dentist in the first place, right? um or right now you don't have enough money to put a down payment on a car, so you're going to be spending a lot of your time and money trying to figure out how you're going to be using public transportation to get to and from work, which is a time expensive activity because you now don't have the time really to ponder your circumstances when you're trying to figure out how you're going to be, making a 3-hour commute to work every day and a 3-hour commute back. So it's about depriving people of time for leisure, time
Mhm.
for rest, and time to actually sit down and ponder your circumstances. But it's also about depriving people an opportunity to take care of an issue now, right? So that you don't have to run into a bigger issue later on that's going to be more expensive. So like
Preach.
it's a poverty investment. They invest in your poverty because they know you'll be paying forever when you never have enough to pay for everything now.
And I
And
mean,
if
it's
you
kind
turn
of the
around, oh, sorry,
reason
go on.
that we're seeing right now in this moment in time in history. That's one of the biggest reasons I believe that we're seeing so much actual civil upheaval and civil unrest happening because so many millions of people finally have the time to
Mm,
sit down and consider how miserable their existence really is on a day to day
mm,
level. And
And
they're
when they
exactly.
finally realizing,
complain,
oh my God, this is horrible and it shouldn't be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. We have the means, we have the resources to make it better, but we're not investing them. And that's why everyone's so pissed off.
Mm,
and when you complain about that, people say, "Well, it's your own fault," which is bullshit. And it's this perpetual systemic racism that's baked into every aspect of both UK culture and American culture. In particular, portrayal of black people in the media, both the news, obviously, but also film. And this is where I really, because I've talked about this quite a bit in the show, because sadly, we have this idea about whitewashing. A lot of people have this idea about whitewashing that it's relegated to the days of Breakfast at Tiffany's or Lawrence of Arabia or fucking that Othello with Laurence Olivier. And it's sadly not. I've talked about it on the show for new releases far, far more than I should have, which is to say, zero. I should be talking about it zero amount of times because it should be happening zero amount of the time, but it
exactly.
doesn't. I mean, I've done a list of several prominent standouts, including but not limited to Prince of Persia, The Last Airbender, The Lone Ranger, Star Trek Into Darkness, Khan is a white guy, what the fuck? Pan, Exodus, Gods of Egypt,
Oh
Doctor
yeah, that's my
Strange,
fave.
Ghost in the Shell, Hellboy, and the more recent Artemis Fowl, as if that film couldn't get any worse. And I just want to talk about just a few of those in particular, because I've ranted about Star Trek Into Darkness far more than I should. Indian, and then he was played by a Mexican. Now he's played by Benedict fucking Cumberbatch. Why? But and I've talked about The Last Airbender. God, no, that is not my Katara. But I mean, so two of the big ones I want to talk about are Pan and Exodus. Pan is sort of like this Peter Pan origin film. It's shit, separate from the whitewashing. It's a shit movie. What the fuck was them setting it in the 1940s and then having a Nirvana song? I don't understand. But here's the thing. And then you have a Native American character, Tiger Lily, played by the whitest girl in the history of white girls, Rooney Mara. And the excuse, I say excuse, it's more close to an explanation, a Weasley explanation at that, the filmmakers gave was that Native American people have not been portrayed well in the media, and we didn't want to fall victim to that. So we decided to recast the role with a white person. And I'm just like, okay, you know, that's fair enough, that's fine. There's just like one little flaw in that plan. You had two options. Option A, cast a Native American in a Native American role, and potentially, if you're stupid, be racist. Or option number two, don't cast a Native American in a Native American role, and definitely be racist.
Racism is a criteria.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And then moving on to Exodus, it's the story of Moses. Moses being played by Christian Bale, another very white man. Yes, because Egyptian people very much look like Christian Bale. Yeah.
And his mother is played by Sigourney Weaver, I think.
I didn't even know that. Holy
Yeah,
shit.
the Queen of Egypt in that movie. It wasn't the King Ben Kingsley and the Queen was Sigourney Weaver in that film.
And here's the thing, Ridley Scott, who needs to retire, I'm sorry, Ridley, you do. The excuse he gave was that how did he put it? He's basically said, look, if I went to the studio heads, the producers, and said, I want to cast so-and-so from such and such, they would tell me no, because there aren't any big name actors from there or of that kind of ethnicity or that kind of ethnic descent.
But gee, I wonder why that is.
Well, here's the thing. As condescending as Sir Ridley put it, I don't know if he's a sir, I don't care. He actually made a very good point, because this is what I was talking about with you, Archit, last time we talked about this. Was something that I call the feedback loop of bigotry. You don't cast any people from that part of the world or anyone who isn't a white person in major roles. Then you're not going to have any people of color to cast in major roles. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so just bite the bullet and just do it, because the more you do it, the more
normal it becomes.
I was going to say colorblind, but yeah, absolutely. And there's been a bit of backlash recently over the announcement that the new live-action Little Mermaid film is going to have a black Ariel. Now, I don't give a shit about the new Little Mermaid movie because I fucking hate the Little Mermaid. I hate Disney, all of it. I will not apologize for that, but I applaud the decision to cast a black person in the role of Ariel. It's not going to help her career at all, but you know what? Fuck it. But a lot of people have criticized that, saying, "Oh no, we don't need a black Ariel because like that doesn't matter." And like, no, I'm sorry, it kind of does. The more you do stuff like this, just colorblind casting, when it comes to roles that can be played by anyone, like the more you do that, the better things will get.
With the Little Mermaid, my I found it so comical how people in their mid and late 20s were crying about how, my childhood has been ruined. And I was like, if your childhood can be ruined by the recasting of a fictional character that is a fish woman, then your childhood was pretty shit to begin with.
Yeah, you might have some bigger issues to examine with your past there.
Yeah, you might need some therapy for something else, because if she's playing a mythical creature. She's not even playing like you've got people who are playing real real characters or real civilizations who are being miscast, and you say nothing. And then people who are just being reimagined as fictional characters or fictional civilizations or even fictional creatures. And suddenly it's like, holy shit. And people do this as well. I mean, when there's like remember when the newest not Batman,
Woman.
Spider-Man was
Oh
that
yeah.
boy Miles Morales, and it's like he's a spider human. Why are you getting fucked up
It's
over,
not like they're saying this is the new Peter Parker. He was an entirely separate character.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, it's insane that like when even African gods or African kings and queens are being played by manifestly non-African people, it's nothing. But then when totally random like fish people are being played, and then also when people saying, I don't understand why they're hiring or they're imagining Ariel based on race. She should have been hired based on her talent and her ability, not just because she's black. And I'm like, that's making the assumption that this girl isn't talented and
Which she
beautiful.
is. She is
She
crazy
is.
talented.
The assumption is that, and this is something that we, as people of color, have been hearing forever. When people accuse us of getting jobs because of affirmative action, it undermines our talent, our intelligence, our hard work, and it basically says you're here because you're black, not because you're smart.
And
And
in
so,
most cases, that
yeah,
person's had to work twice as hard their
ex-
entire life.
exactly.
And it's the annoying thing. It's still ongoing. A lot of people think of it as part of history. Think, oh, whitewashing. That's just Mickey Rooney as a Japanese person. No, and I mean, this isn't necessarily. Well, it's not. It's not related to people of color. But recently, something that really angered me, and it's angered quite a lot of people, is the announcement. So, did either of you watch Chicken Run?
No.
Um, I'm
Chicken Run?
trying. I'm familiar with the title, but I don't know if it's what I think it is.
It's a stop motion animated film that's like The Great Escape, but with chickens, done by the same people who did Wallace and Gromit.
Oh,
And
Wasn't it on
yeah,
like
I think
Adult
I've
Swim
seen.
or something?
No. It's
what?
a
Sorry,
movie. It's an actual movie.
Oh, it's a movie.
it's a
I think I
fantastic
did
movie, and
see
I
this
absolutely.
years ago.
Yeah, I
Maybe.
feel like
I recommend giving it a rewatch because it still holds up. It's fantastic, even though it's got Mel Gibson in it. Just gonna ignore that.
oh
But
shit.
but um, but here's the thing: they announced, took me by surprise, that they're doing a Chicken Run 2, like 20 years after the original. But the main character was a character called Ginger, a chicken, voiced by a prominent British comedic actress, Julia Swahala, and who is and is recently announced that they decided to recast that character because Julia sounds too old. A decision that greatly angered Julia as she put out a video of her redoing her lines from Chicken Run, and she sounds exactly the fucking same. And here's the thing: there's a practice in the industry where they do sound tests to see if in the sequel the voice has changed somewhat and the actor can still do it. Julie was not invited to do a sound test. She was not asked to come back. She was not informed that she was going to be recast. She found out when they announced that they were recasting the role. And it's this issue of sexism and ageism, and just apparently it's Netflix doing it. So make of that what you will. And it's so egregious and so bold and barefaced. And guys, because here's the thing: people know who these characters are. They know what they're supposed to sound like. They know what it's supposed to look like. It's not like people don't know. We know that fucking Jake Gyllenhaal doesn't look like he comes from Persia. We know that Jackson Rathbone does not look like he's at all Inuit. And we know, Johnny Depp, that you may be 1/16th Cherokee, but that doesn't make you Native fucking American.
Who the fuck isn't 1/16th Cherokee according to white Americans? Everybody's like, yeah, I think I'm like 1/16th Cherokee. Um,
It's
oh
always when
my
it's
god. Okay.
convenient, on college applications and stuff like that. Whenever it's convenient to you, you suddenly become 1/16th Cherokee.
And it's
Yeah.
always Cherokee or Navajo, as if there weren't like hundreds of communities throughout the Americas that you possibly, even if you were 1/16th, could have been. Everybody's Cherokee because apparently that's the only one. And I get that a lot as a South African as well. When people, I tell them I'm South African, everyone just assumes that I'm Zulu because apparently that's the only tribe that exists in Africa. Everyone is just Zulu.
It's
I
the
think
same with
people, yeah, just
Asian nations
all
as
of
well. People
Africa.
assume that there are different ethnic Chinese people, different ethnic Japanese people, or things like that.
Mm.
And we live in a diverse world, people. There's not just one blank slate for people, not even one blank slate for white people. There's different varieties. I've no idea what they are because fuck it, I'm English. I don't care. But it, it
Yeah, I mean, I
it's
gotta be honest. I've that's one of the problems that I've always had with the term white in general. Is I'm just like, why, why do you want to be white? Like you are Italian American, right? So celebrate being Italian. You are German, so celebrate being German. Why are you also participating in the erasure of your own cultural identity and just becoming white, which is just nothing, you know?
and
Well,
I've
It's
I
had the
just
opposite problem with that because I'm from England, my family is from England, and we've recently traced back my our family roots, and guess what? They're from England. So my heritage, my cultural identity, I've never considered. I know I'm white. To quote Stephen Colbert, because I buy my drugs at a pharmacy, but that's a quote. That's a quote. But the point is, uh, I've never had to consider myself white because I'm so chock full of white privilege that I don't even notice that I'm white. I've only ever thought of myself as British or part English or part Scottish, and it's my identity is purely rooted in my nationality, not my ethnicity.
Part of the explanation, or at least as far as creating whiteness in America, is because there was a time in Europe where there was no white identity or whiteness, right? You were Irish, you were Italian, you were French, you were a Frenchman, you were an Englishman, whatever, an Irishman. And that was sort of the most key component part of your identity. But then, of course, when in the United States, they started using all of these weird sort of eugenicist definitions to try to carve out which identities were
The white
considered
man's
superior,
burden and things like that.
things like that, but also trying to break down like how they would say like, well, okay, but whites of the Caucasoid race versus the Celtic versus the Germanic, and they were trying to put all of the pseudoscience to attach, the temperaments of this one group of people. And so, for example, if you were Jewish in certain places, nobody really considered you white, or if you were Italian, you weren't really considered white,
Mhm.
and exactly because you weren't part of this race of the Caucasoid or whatever that they thought was the superior race. And so they started loosening up all of the definitions and the restrictions, which meant people who were Italian, people who were Jewish, people who were Irish, and were now starting to fit under this umbrella of whiteness could take advantage of the fact that they were white because their whiteness still then put them above the Negro, the Native,
Yes.
etc., etc.
And this
Exactly. Yeah,
was
the definition of whiteness in America has always been about the exclusionary in group that's in power. And little by little over the course of history, they started including more people within that definition of whiteness just so they could keep down the people who definitely were not white.
Yeah, South
absolutely, and
Africa.
so go
So
on.
sorry. South Africa is also a lovely example of this because we had a ton of refugees and immigrants come to South Africa after World War II, and they knew that they were coming into the new apartheid government in South Africa, but under the protection of whiteness, they would never have to worry about being excluded or persecuted, right? So they came as refugees where they faced genocide and oppression in Eastern Europe, right? But they came into South Africa with the guarantee that their religion, their Jewishness, was not going to be a hindrance, but their whiteness was still going to work for them, even if it was at the expense of the native Africans there, right? Or the black
Hmm.
people there.
And you couldn't even say that about America. America famously turned away many Jewish refugees during World War II and afterwards.
Oh, yeah, that's
Many they
true.
had to go back, and many of them sadly were killed in the Holocaust. And
Mm.
it's fascinating the sort of codependent nature of exclusionary government policies that are inherent within the system, and the media's portrayal of said excluded groups. I mean, I could go on. I could give you a whole history lesson about D.W. Griffith's Birth of the Nation,
Oh,
Oh,
jazz
yeah.
God.
singer, Gone with the Wind. Ooh, have you heard of that one? And, but
The
here's the
happy
thing.
slave narrative.
Exactly. It just it went on and on and on and on for so long, and I think it only really started to change thanks to a man called Gene Roddenberry and a little show called Star Trek.
Oh, right. Apparently that was a
Yeah, the
big
original.
moment.
Yeah, because here's the thing: Nichelle Nichols loves telling the story, and frankly, it's a fantastic story. If you're not familiar with Capers, I'm going to tell you. If you are familiar with it, buckle up; it's a great ride. Because Nichelle Nichols was she was a theatre actress, and she got the role on Star Trek and playing communications officer Uhura, and she was like, "Nah, this is fine, but I kind of want to go back to theatre." And she said to Gene Roddenberry, "Look, Gene, I've had a great time, but I'd rather just go back to the stage." And Gene was like, "I'd really like to stay, but tell you what, just think about it." And then she was at some sort of benefit dinner, some sort of gala or something, and she was approached by Dr. Martin Luther King, and he told her that Star Trek was the only show that he allowed his kids to stay up and watch because of her, because of the first time in American television, just American media in general, that a black woman had been on the screen and she was not in a position of service. She was not a maid or anything. She was part of the crew of the Starship
Hmm.
Enterprise. And then Nichelle said to him, "Well, that's very kind of you, but I'm actually thinking of quitting the show." And he told her, "You can't quit the show. You're too important." And she didn't quit the show. And now Uhura lives on as an inspiring figurehead, both in the civil rights movement, also just as portrayal of black people in general. And that was the turning point, as you pointed out, Lindy.
Mm. Yeah, no, I mean, there are so many people now, especially, yeah, people in my generation, who are so disenchanted by films like The Help and stuff, because we would rather
Ah,
see ourselves, and that's also why they love things like Empire, because I mean, I'm not a fan of Empire because there's a lot of problematic themes in there too, but they're more into Empire because there black people get to be the boss, black people
Yeah,
get to make the money, black people get
ownership.
to spend the money. Exactly, there's a degree of power, and the stories are centered around black people, not white people who, you know, give them a leg up or who save their lives. I mean, does anybody remember there's a whole slew of these films in these white savior categories, but
Oh yeah.
there have
Green
been
Book.
lot. Exactly.
Green
What's
Book. I
this?
mean, The Last Samurai.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I was just, and of course, in the early 2000s and the late 90s, there was like a slew of like white teachers in hard black neighborhoods. Remember
Oh
Dangerous
yeah.
Minds with like
Yes.
Michelle Pfeiffer? So it was a
I need to
majority
help these
white.
kids believe in themselves.
Right, right. The rest of the blind side
Which
with
Oh,
I'm not gonna. Oh, The Blind Side. Oh my God. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I am still
Andy,
a fan of
no.
Dangerous Minds, mostly because the soundtrack was just
yeah.
fire,
No,
just
I
straight
loved the
fire.
soundtrack.
But yeah, definitely. Dangerous. Blind Side was just terrible. Especially
There
because like
was
the movie made it seem like he didn't even know how to play football until this white lady taught him how to do it and simplified the whole concept of it for him. No, he had been a football player. He had been a very competent football player his entire youth before he ever even met this lady. He understood football. It's not like he was some dumb idiot that needed her to tell him, "Oh, you got to just protect the person like it's your family." No, he understood how to play.
We don't need
Uh,
those stories. We don't
The
need that
man went
narrative.
on to
I don't
win a
think we
Super
ever
Bowl.
needed
God
it.
damn it!
and
Oh,
also, I mean, I don't remember how exactly they met, but this whole you remember the scene where she sees him like at a bus stop in the rain, and
Hmm.
out of like the generosity and the mercy of her kindness or whatever, she takes him. I'm like, no, that's not how they met. And also this narrative that he came from this hard family, and his mom was a crack, like it was a crack addict, and his home was abusive, and that was also not the case at all. So this whole this
someone read the novel Push by Sapphire. Like,
and and also, of course, the hidden figures thing, where the scene with Kevin Costner taking down the segregated bathroom sign, that never fucking happened. Like, just I think this is a way that white writers can aggrandize themselves and sort of still, make a story about race, but not make an honest story about race, because I feel like this is just another way that white people can avoid telling the truth about themselves.
Yeah.
it's not more than that. It's just about controlling the narrative. That's the thing. You want to make up shit about your own history? Fine, you go ahead. You're hurting no one but yourself. But you can't do that with other people. You just
Mm,
can't.
mm.
And it, it's still prevalent. And unfortunately, the stories that need to be told aren't being told because we discussed this last time, Archit. Um, because of discriminating hiring practices when it comes
Hmm.
to directors and writers. And so, if you want to tell a story about the black experience in America, they might hire a black writer or a black director, probably get a load of white producers to peer over their shoulders the whole time.
Yep.
Yep.
But if you want to tell just a story that has nothing to do with race, 99 times out of 100, they're going to hire someone that's white. And they're going to
Yep.
cast people that are white. And you can point to individual examples to the contrary, but those are anomalies, unfortunately. I don't care how many times they cast Will Smith or Denzel Washington, like, great for them. Great for them. Love me a bit of Denzel. But unfortunately, that's not the norm.
And also, I mean, with regards to writers, and it's not even just that they write stories that are so one-sided. It's also they write stories that are so misrepresentative of. So, because I was having this conversation also with my mom, where we were talking about how anytime you see a story where there are even if it's a story where there are women at the center of it, but there are male writers, they're always going to be reduced to talking about men all the time, or they're going to be reduced to having, because they're the children of the imagination of men and what men think women do in the absence of men, right? Or anytime you have a
Wait, you mean you guys
story,
don't talk about men when we're not around?
apparently it's only men in periods. It's
This is
only
new to
men in
me.
periods. But also, this is why stories that are written about young people, right? When you have all these high school dramas and stuff, that are such a shitty portrayal of teenagers. They lack any kind of complexity. I mean, like, everything is just so bad, because it's adults trying to remember their own experience of high school. And I'm sorry, but like, when you're pushing 30, you can't be writing about high schoolers today because the experience is different. And
Hmm.
also, once you start getting to a certain age, you almost forget how difficult it was to be young, because you're now looking at the difficulties of life through your experience of adulthood. So you make it sound like it was such an easy, like all you had to do was go to school and stay out of trouble, when in reality there's so much complexity. And I'm bringing this up in particular because there was one writer who wrote a movie. I haven't seen it yet, but apparently it's getting some pretty good reviews. But I think what was it called, like Eighth Grade or something? It came out recently, and apparently he made it a point. He really tried to make it a point, because he was like 26 when he wrote this, to make sure that his protagonist, a 14-year-old girl, was a central part in the creative process of writing the story, because he wanted it to feel like this is the actual experience of a 14-year-old eighth grader, and not an adult's memory or imaginings of what it is to be a kid. And and same can be said about queer characters being written about by straight people, where you always have the gay man being some white girl's some girl's best friend,
Yeah.
always being sassy and like, girl, no. You know what I'm saying? They're
Oh
all
hell no, girlfriend!
exactly right.
I'm
They're
part of
always
the
the guy
problem.
that
I
you
should have done that impression.
they're always the guy that the straight girl goes to for fashion advice. Like, not all straight guys know anything about fashion, but when you've got straight men writing about gay guys, they're always gonna, or writing about, even worse, gay women.
Excuse me. I think you find I know quite a bit about fashion, and I know that I know a lot about fashion because I'm wearing a T-shirt that has Iron Man as the Mandalorian and Baby Groot as Baby Yoda. So
I gotta be honest.
I'm just
I
saying
know
I
that was
am
a
the
joke, but
devil that
that sounds
wears
like a
Iron Man.
dope shirt. I want that shirt.
I was just gonna say that sounds like something would buy, completely blind to the irony sometimes, because some people buy shit like that and you're like, bruh, seriously?
Oh,
Oh,
I'm just saying Anna Winter can call me. But anyway,
if
and
she, yeah, so go on.
yeah, you're just absolutely right. Right, it doesn't have to be accurate because no piece of fictional media is going to be accurate because it's fictional. You can't portray the realities of life in an hour and a half movie. You just can't. There's no way. But what you can do is you can be authentic. You can be naturalistic. That's the thing that was taught
Yes.
to me when I was studying screenwriting, both for BM for my masters. Just like don't try to be realistic. Try and be naturalistic. And part of that is including people from those walks of life, from those ethnicities, from those sexualities or gender identities in the creative process so that you can be authentic. No one expects a straight, cisgendered white man to know the complexities of life of being, say, a black trans gay woman.
Mm.
But if you're going to write a story about that, which you absolutely should, make sure you know what the fuck you're talking about by involving those people in the discussion or in some way, shape, or form, or better yet, give the story to them. Because maybe it's
Yeah.
their story and they're the ones who should be telling it. And more than that, as I said earlier, maybe let them tell stories that aren't maybe specifically directly related to their personal experiences. When are we going to get an action movie that has a trans person as the action hero? It's not about them being trans. It's just about them kicking ass and taking names and maybe chewing some bubblegum.
Yeah,
That's
that's
what we need.
another problem, is anytime you have a marginalized character, their marginalization becomes central to the story, as if their
Hmm.
marginalization is their entire identity and existence. I want to see a story about a woman where, she's not constantly dealing with rape and domestic violence. Like, I want to see a story that's not always about, I want to see a story about somebody who's gay, where like their entire narrative isn't always about coming out or struggling with their sexuality or being ostracized by their family. I'm not saying exclude those things from the narrative entirely, but don't make that the entire narrative, because anytime you have like a straight white man, we don't write a story about his entire world being about being straight and being white and being male. We get to tell a story of him as a complex human being, with complex human being issues, and just human issues.
As a straight white man, I've never seen any movie actually tackle that subject about how hard it is to be a straight white man. No, it doesn't happen because yeah, it's so important, especially right now, because it's both a lack of a diverse set of hiring practices, people in front of the camera, behind the camera, and also these narratives, but also it's fighting against this narrative. The American dream, systemic racism, all these horrible portrayals throughout history that are still ongoing. And it's we need it now more than ever. We've always needed
Mm.
it, but now we need it now more than ever. We need a fucking ton of it.
Yeah, and that brings me back to my earlier point about appreciating being in this digital age where we're less reliant on mainstream stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
There's a lot of people now who are creating their own like YouTube pages and production companies, and a lot of people who are basically just taking stuff, and it's a lot harder,
TikTok.
I think, in a lot of ways.
We want
But
more TikTok has done to Donald Trump lately.
I mean, I and like, but genuinely though, I mean, there are a lot more people who are creating their own like animation, like companies and stuff, and they're putting stuff out there on their own pages and they're creating their own products because they're not waiting for some mandate from a big production studio or from a
Hmm.
big record label or from a big news outlet, right? If you want to produce news that, or if you want to produce documentaries that give you an accurate portrayal of history or an accurate portrayal of current events, now you can follow somebody's page. I mean, there's a
Mhm.
downside to that as well. I mean, now you've also got conspiracy theorists and whacks out there who are creating these little echo chambers where they can tell each other stories about why the world is flat and why vaccines kill people. So there's always a downside. But but for those of us who are looking to empower women, people of color, queer people, people who are trying to tell stories about what's happening in the Middle East from the perspective of the people who are being bombed, whose homes are being shelled by the American
Hmm.
government, rather than hearing the narratives from American, you know, uh, corporate media that is selling lies. Now we have options. We can actually access these things. We can put out our own information. Um,
One of the
there,
best web
Yeah.
series that I've ever seen is a web series that's about a gay woman, and in fact, it introduced me to the term non-binary through a non-binary character. It's called Carmilla. Check it out; it's fucking awesome. But there's vampires. So here's the thing: that just using that example, it for me again as a straight white cisgendered man. I don't know if you keep forgetting that I'm that because I sure as hell keep reminding people. Um, it opened up um this new whole new world for me, these characters that I never seen before portrayed, and it broadened my horizons. And that's not what
Yeah.
it's there for. It's not there to enlighten the white man, but it's important, I think, for me to immerse myself in so many of these different viewpoints as possible, not just because it's good for me as a human being, but also because it's fun, it's entertaining.
Yes.
These things are meant to
mm,
be entertaining,
Yes.
and that should always be films and web shows and TV series and video games and all that can be used to enlighten, to educate, to inspire, but first and foremost they're there to, you know, to be fun
yeah, to
and
entertain.
to entertain. And what I like from my entertainment is diversity. I like seeing a wide variety of narratives. I immerse myself in different genres, in different mediums, but I don't want all these genre mediums to be focused around one group of people. I don't want that because I am lucky to be born on a planet with such a vast array of people and ideas and philosophies and cultures. And I am wasting my time on this earth if I don't try and experience that, as much of that as I can, through the various media available to me.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're intellectually curious in any capacity, then you should be very much on the side of and demanding that kind of change of seeing more diversity in stories, seeing different narratives, different characters, different perspectives, because that helps expand your intellectual horizons, just like you said. So I feel like the people who always have a problem with these things are people who have no intellectual curiosity, who want to just be stagnant in their ways and just stay there forever.
Something that I like to do a lot, which is kind of ironic for me because I'm guilty of being on the wrong side of this. But something I like to do a lot is compare certain aspects of life to food, in that um generally speaking, the more diverse your flavor profile is in any sort of experience, the more diverse, right? There's a very wide variety of different kinds of foods that you can
Yeah.
ingest. And so, and
Wait, there is?
that's no, and that's not just because it's fun and because it's exciting to explore different flavors and different colors and textures, but also because it's literally good for you. You cannot live on literally one you cannot live on berries alone. As much as you love berries, you also need other stuff in order to sustain your life. You can't just eat one food group or one food type. And so what I always say to people, like, if you want to survive in a world where there is variety, you have to consume variety because it is there for your edification, not just because you like it or you don't like it, but because it's literally good for you.
Yeah, in England, we used to just survive on fish and chips and pies and dirt. Now, we've got all sorts of different cuisines that we stole from other cultures. So, I mean, not even joking, like the number one dish in
That's
England
true.
is the chicken tikka masala,
Yeah.
I'm
which
just gonna say,
again,
isn't it some kind of Indian food?
Yeah. Yeah. Which,
we
well, I mean, here's
Yeah.
the thing: that chicken tikka masala has kind of a fraught history in terms of how Indian it is. But yes,
is
it
it
is the
sort of
number
like
one.
the Chinese fortune cookie sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. It was literally made in the UK. It was made in an Indian restaurant. That part is true. So that much is authentic. But it was made in the UK, and it was specifically made because I think a customer, the legend has it, a customer came and ordered like a chicken tikka, which is just a kebab by itself, and they complained that it was too dry for their liking, and so they asked if the chef could put some kind of a sauce on it. And so the chef just kind of threw together really quick a few things that he had lying around to cover this dry chicken in a sauce. Guy really liked it, and then it just took off from there. So it's
Oh
not even,
shit,
it
the
was a
white guy
thing that
hates my
was
cooking.
made. Yeah, it was a thing that was made in England. Chicken tikka masala didn't exist in India until it was made in England. And now you can go to India and you can get it too. So it's an interesting thing of like colonial cross pollination.
Yeah, it's
Apparently, the same can be said about chop suey. It was entirely invented
Oh
in
yeah,
a
completely
yeah,
American.
by Chinese immigrants in the United States. There's no such thing really as chop suey if you look at authentic Chinese foods. So there's a lot of stuff that can be
Most
said about
American
that.
Chinese menus, I mean, the majority of an American Chinese restaurant's menu is not stuff that they eat in China and is not stuff that the owners of the restaurant even are cooking for themselves at home. They're
No,
still cooking
absolutely.
authentically Chinese food, but the American customer doesn't want that. They want their things in that shiny glazy sauce and with the same three vegetables for every single dish. So that's what they give because that's what sells.
and
And
this is
also
this.
there's oh,
Sorry, go
sorry,
on.
go on.
Well, I was just going to say this goes back to what we're saying about this idea of narratives. It's not just something that's in film; it's baked into our culture. This we have ideas that are perpetuated over time, and we think they're real, but they're not.
Mm.
And it's tricky. It's tricky, and it's hard to break free of those preconceptions, especially when they're drilled into you, especially from a young age. But it's worth it because it's not about being woke, which is a phrase I hate. It's not even about being PC, which I don't hate. But it's just about trying to get a greater understanding of how we got here as a society. Not so that you can use it as a weapon against people who don't know, but so you can use it to make the present better and the future brighter. And
Mm.
part of that is, as you pointed out, Archit, policy, whether that be on a federal government level or on a smaller corporate level. And this is the thing. Some corporations are, to their minimal credit, and I do mean minimal, holding themselves accountable for that because they have policies. They have like company manifestos that says we stand firm against racism, sexism, and any kind of discriminatory policy because we are, of course, a hedge fund management corporation, and therefore we need that. But here's the thing: then someone goes off on a racist rant in Central Park or in a suburb somewhere or in a Costco, and it turns out they get fired from those places because the bosses see that and thinking, well, oh, they're gone then. And it's it's just one of those things where when you put that sort of policy in place and you actually follow through with them, it just shows that there are consequences and things move forward in a certain way. You don't have to cancel cop shows. You don't have to pull specific episodes of SNL. I mean, that's fine. Okay, great. But that's not going to change anything. If anything, that's just erasing stuff. You
Yeah.
don't need to erase stuff. You need to write something new.
I
Right.
definitely, yeah, I prefer the contextualization of things like that. Like I actually really, and I know some people have different opinions on this, but I thought Disney Plus kind of did a somewhat decent job with that, where older cartoons and older films and stuff that had these very obviously racist tropes, they have a disclaimer at the beginning that's like, look, this was made in a completely different time. Cultural sensitivities were nowhere near what they are now, and so you're going to see some stuff that, from today's eyes, looks pretty fucked up. And honestly, it was probably fucked up back then too. But it is what it is, you know? So if you
Did
want to
they
enjoy
actually use the
that,
word fucked up? Because that
yeah.
seems
So
very
if
off
you,
brand for Disney.
that's a little bit of my own wishful projection. But so at least they acknowledged that there was something wrong with it, and they're like, well, we still, if you want to still watch this, there is still something you might be able to get out of it. At the very least, maybe some entertainment, but know that these are problematic aspects of it. So at least you contextualize it. I really like doing that
Hmm.
instead of just completely getting rid of things altogether.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
This is
and
something we discussed last time. Oh, Tom and Jerry cartoons, and also what they're probably going to do with Gone with the Wind on
Hmm.
HBO. And
mm,
that's what you need to contextualize for the present and legislate for the future. Getting rid of qualified immunity, so many other aspects that I sadly am just ignorant of because I don't know how to solve this problem. But you know what? There's a lot of people who do.
I think also education is key because when
Hmm.
we see even like high schools and colleges deciding that they're not going to teach Huckleberry Finn or Gone with the Wind, I'm like, this is a perfect opportunity for you guys to be teaching the gritty, like sort of crazy
Hmm.
ways that we've sort of perpetuated systems, unjust systems through our literature, through
Yes.
our films and things like that. Don't just make them disappear. Use them as a teaching moment. I mean, and also when I talk about education, there are still like universities around the world that perpetuate this notion that like darker skinned people have thicker skin and therefore are less prone to pain than lighter skinned people, and that then affects hospital policies because now you've got black people who are suffering or darker skinned people who are suffering pain unnecessarily because people literally think that we don't feel it the same way that white people do. So I mean, education on every level, not just in literature and filmmaking but even in the sciences,
Yeah.
right? Even in the
And
sciences, in the medical schools where they talk about female reproduction and they talk about gender dysphoria being a disease, and that has a way that negatively affects the way that they treat trans patients or gay patients or whatever. So just on every level.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, honestly,
both in the
it's one of
language
those
that
things
you
where,
use and also. Sorry, go on.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, honestly, it's, when it comes to not teaching those things, like getting rid of Huckleberry Finn from the literature curriculum, that I think to me speaks more of, maybe it was the teachers, maybe it was some of the students, and most likely it was some of the parents just wanted to avoid the discomfort of having
Right.
that discussion.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
And
I
it's not
definitely
about
know that
education,
happens a
and
lot
it's
in
not
my
about
school.
making things better. It's about avoiding the discomfort of having a very awkward discussion. And honestly, to any white person listening to this right now, I would say, please, the biggest thing you can do to be an ally, embrace that bitch.
Oh yeah.
Embrace that
Oh yeah.
discomfort. Look,
I
Fully
mean,
and
immerse
I'm
yourself in
English.
it.
I'm
tag
uncomfortable
it hard,
literally all
because
the
people
time.
of color,
So
yeah, people of color have had to live with that discomfort forever. They've had that as a monkey on their back forever. So the
Mm.
least white people can do now in this moment is to embrace it. It's going to be very uncomfortable to talk about these things. It will. And believe me, it's not going to be a picnic in the park for us either, for you to have these discussions, but have them.
There's no quick
This
fix. There's no simple solution. You can't just put on some, like, you can't just take a knee. You can't, looking at you, Pelosi. You can't do any of that stuff.
Oh
It's
God.
it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to address these concerns and fix these problems, and it's going to take decades. This is not going to be over come 2021.
Don't
you
just
know
be
as
not
as
racist,
somebody
be anti-racist.
as somebody who has
Mm.
like been through therapy since childhood, something that I that was a huge takeaway for me was that any psychologist or any therapist will tell you that when you've encountered something that's like really really uncomfortable or really really painful, you can't really get around it, you can't get over it, you can't get under it, you have to go through it,
Mm-hmm.
because that's really the only way you're going to get to the other side of it. So I mean, my advice to white people or any, privileged people is, you can't get around it, you can't go under it or over it. Stop trying to dodge it, right? Having these
Yeah.
uncomfortable and sometimes even painful discussions, or having these really awkward moments where you're going to have to turn the mirror on yourself and see the ugly truth of how you got to where
Mhm.
you are and how you got to your privilege. Don't try to get around it. Go through it. Go through the discomfort and the pain, because that's literally the only way you're going to get to the other side of it.
This
And it's still
requires
probably
being
only going to be a
active, not being
fraction of what people of
passive.
color have endured historically.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
You know, and also, I mean, I've never met a problem that went away through avoidance. Avoiding your problems has never solved any kind of problem. So why would we think it'll solve this
Mm,
one? When you avoid a
mm,
problem, all you do is have it waiting in the corner, getting bigger and bigger and bigger until you
absolutely.
cannot ignore it anymore. And
And that's
Mm,
why it's
we're
so
reaching that
gratifying to
point.
see so many people right now not avoiding it, but actively tackling it through marches, through protest, through activism. And that's why many of the links that we had on the last episode we talked about this will be back up in the show notes now, Capers. So please do check them out. Help where you can, share where you can, donate when you can, because this is not over. I'm going to keep it going, and it's only when we stop talking about it that it becomes over. And lots of people right now aren't talking about it, but so let's keep talking about it. Not so much on this show, because now we're going to wrap things up.
yes.
Absolutely. So, Archit, Lindy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for inviting me.
That's not a problem. I'm glad we could talk about this. And if you enjoyed this today, Capers, please tell your friends, shout it from the rooftops. If you haven't already, go back and listen to some other super episodes, like last time when we were talking about the various black superheroes throughout history. You can listen to the show on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, or at podcapers.com. If you want to get in touch with us, suggest show topics, or maybe come on the show yourself, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AP2HYC. Thank you very much to Dan Harris for our logo, the lovely microphone, the red and blue 3D glasses. Those are mine. And thank you for listening. This has been Podcapers, the official podcast of a place to hang your cape. Cue the music.